Hey, I got a confession.
Welcome to the Indie Author Method, where we share insights from authors for you on your writing journey. On the weekends, when you have more time and space in your day, we sit down with another author to discuss their processes and what they can share with you. This episode is brought to you by Monk Manual. Monk Manual at its core is a 90-day productivity system, but it's much more than that. Monk Manual as a company is on a mission to fix modern productivity and help people live fuller lives. Inspired by the wisdom of monks and rooted in psychology, they designed practical tools for peaceful being and purposeful doing. They were so gracious to partner with the Indie Author Method, and you can check out their products, including the 90-day planner that I personally use, at their website, monkmanual.com. Be sure to use promo code Andrew J. Brandt at checkout for 15% off your order. That's promo code Andrew J. Brandt, my name, all one word, at monkmanual.com. Now on to the interview. Today, I'm so excited to be joined by Laura Sims, the author of How Can I Help You? I featured this book on my book club segment on Studio 4 a month or so ago, and I knew that I had to talk with Laura about it. It's definitely in the top 5 books I've read this year, and after some arm twisting, I finally got Laura to come on the podcast. Laura, how are you?
Good, I'm good.
Thank you so much for the time today. I'm so excited to get to talk with you. Yes, about the book.
I'm just holding it up for people.
Before I pressed record on the podcast today, I admitted that I didn't think this interview was going to happen.
Really?
And after I read the book and I featured it on Studio 4 on KAMR NBC4 here, I put out my book in my little free library out in our front yard, and it got snatched up real quick.
I'm glad it did.
So let's talk about. Yes, let's talk about this book that delves into the seedy underbelly of the small town public library. What inspired you to write this, and how did you even come up with this idea?
I mean, I do work in a library. I'm a part-time reference librarian, and I was working on a new novel or thinking about a new novel, like what's next. And I had, while I was working, I had just started working for like a year or so at the library, and I was surprised every day at the library by the things that would happen there. It wasn't at all what I expected library work would be like. And I started taking notes on some of the kind of interesting patron interactions and just things that people would say or do. And I knew that I wanted to write about the library somehow, but I didn't have any kind of idea like, oh, this is a novel or whatever. I just was taking notes. At the same time, I was revisiting some notes I'd made a while ago about ideas for books. And I have always wanted to write about a female serial killer. And I had this one in mind. I had listened to this episode of the Criminal podcast. It's a really great true crime podcast about Jane Toppin, who was known as Jolly Jane. And she was a killer nurse in the 1800s. She killed many people, and she was really fascinating because she was this cheerful, friendly, and very efficient nurse who was admired by her colleagues and loved by her patients, and she was killing her patients pretty steadily.
Yikes.
Yeah, she's a really fascinating character. And so I had made a note about her when I listened to that podcast, and I picked that note up and I started to write in her voice. And I don't even remember how it happened, honestly, that I kind of merged those two things, the library and Jolly Jane. Yeah. But it happened at some point, and it was kind of the perfect, like, weird marriage between them.
Well, as a reference librarian, I hope you are more Patricia and not Margo.
I don't know if that's good. I don't know. She's pretty horrible too. But yes, there's a lot of me in Patricia. There's a lot because she's a writer, and she's like shocked by the difference between what she learned in grad school about library work and the reality of it. Right. She's kind of horrified by it. I was fascinated. It was just like so much material and so interesting to see what it's really like. So.
Yeah. So working in the library, I grew up in a library. My grandmother was a librarian. I grew up on this steady diet of like R.L. Stein and Stephen King. Who are some of your literary influences, either from growing up or even now, and how have they impacted your writing style?
Growing up, I would say I also sort of grew up in a library. My dad, my parents divorced really early, and my dad kind of didn't know what to do with me on Saturdays when he had me. And we would go to the library for many hours and then go see movies for many hours. And books and movies are like two of my great loves now. And, probably like you influenced me as a writer, just being in that zone. Always a hardcore Nancy Drew fan from the time I was a very little. I had a Nancy Drew diary. I had my own little detective agency that I set up when I was 7 years old or something that was, not successful, but it was, I had my heart in the right place. I was always drawn to those books. I loved those books. I loved Nancy. And yes, Stephen King. Also, I would say, oh my gosh, so many books Judy Blume. So early influences for sure. Those were like some of the top ones.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So can you tell us about maybe your writing process a little bit? Do you have any particular rituals or habits that you follow? What does it look like when Laura Sims sits down to write?
Sure. I try to work, almost always work in the mornings. So I either sit down at home after my son, who's in middle school, leaves for school, or I go someplace. There's a writing space that I use once a week, or I walk to a cafe. Couple options around that where I try to go work, but almost always in the morning, because that's when I have energy, when I have time, and kind of have the space in my day to sit down and really focus. So I try to do that 3 to 4 times a week. And then I work at the library twice a week for like half days.
Okay.
So.
I found that I am a much different writer in the afternoon than I am in the morning. I do most of my writing first thing in the morning. I feel like my brain is fresh. I can get the words out. Do you write for time or for word count?
It depends. If I am working on a draft, that's like a first draft. That's my least favorite thing to do. And so then I do word count. Then it's like, okay, I forget what I did this last time. I think I did 12 to 1,500 words a day. And then I just done. And when I'm revising, I could do that for a lot longer. Like that will bleed into other times of the day. I just find it so much easier to like hop back into the book and tinker around a little bit. But yeah, and then I do it more for time, but yeah.
Gotcha. Yeah. I don't like the editing process. Like it's a necessary evil.
It really is.
I love the excitement of like when that story's coming out, and
I get that.
And then like I'm working off my note cards, and then my note cards just kind of veer off somewhere else.
Right. I mean, that is exciting. There are definitely moments of excitement when you're drafting. I do understand that. I don't know. I find it tedious most of the time. I just want to have words on the page, and then I will like right now I'm basically rewriting a half of a draft. But it's still better because I have those words. I don't know, even though I don't want them.
Sure.
They're there.
That's a perfect segue into my next question. It's just about your challenges, that you face while writing. Did you have any specific challenges while writing? How can I help you, and how'd you overcome them?
Well, I was coming off a really hard time. I had published my first novel, Looker, and then I think we were in COVID by then. And so I was, kind of sequestered anyway. And then I finished a second novel that was not How Can I Help You, and turned it in, and they didn't want it.
Okay.
And nobody wanted it. Like, it was just not published. So that was a huge blow. And it was certainly not the first blow I'd suffered, like
Sure.
I've had tons of rejection before that, I can return to that in a second, but it was definitely such a blow because I'd had like a first successful novel and then thought, well, this is, now I got started, right? So
Right.
nothing can stop me, but that's not how the publishing industry works. So I had the second novel that nobody wanted. So I put it aside. I'd say for about a month, I was grieving and like just so devastated and heartbroken. And then I sat down and I started to work on this book, and it was very painful. And the process I described was real. Like, I was drawing on my library work and that story about Jane Toppin. So I was intrigued, but it was also like there was a pain in my stomach as I wrote for that first month or so. But soon enough, the process itself like kind of healed me, and I, got into this book.
Yeah, sure.
And really just loved writing it. So yeah, but I've had tons of, when I started writing fiction, I had been a poet for many, many years, and I'd published poetry books. And then I decided to write fiction. I started off trying to write young adult fiction. And, I wrote a first book that didn't even get an agent. The second one, I got an agent. He sent it around for 2 years because we were getting good responses, but nobody was taking it. And while I was writing or working on that YA book and kind of waiting, I started to write Looker, and Looker was like a whole different world for me, Then it happened quickly. Like, I got a new agent in a week. We sold it in 2 weeks at auction. It's just like I've really lived the entire spectrum of the publishing experience, for better and worse.
Let me ask you about that then. Dealing with that much rejection and then finally seeing success from that, how did that shape you as a writer and even as a person? How do you deal with that kind of rejection over and over until it finally clicks?
I mean, I think you really, when people say you need a tough skin to be a writer, they're not kidding. And, I think of myself as a really sensitive person, but I also have developed a thick skin. It takes a lot to throw me. And I also kind of developed, a friend told me during this period when I, had that second, what should have been my second novel rejected. I can't use the language that she used, but basically said, do your own thing. Don't think about them. Like, don't think about anybody. Do what you want to do. Enjoy it. Like, this is the good part, the writing, and this is yours. And I have really clung to that, through many other ups and downs. Like, it really has to come down to, would I write this book anyway? And, do I love what I'm writing, regardless of what happens with it? And I think that's a good test anyway, because if you're not writing with that kind of passion, it's going to come across on the page.
Oh yeah, 100%. I've said that before too, that readers can tell if you're not passionate about what you're writing.
Yeah.
That's why I hate the idea of like write to market. I don't think
it doesn't work.
It doesn't work. If you're not passionate about the process or about what you're writing about, it comes off as false.
You can like hope that it meets the market wherever it is at that crazy moment, but
100%.
to try to write to it is such a mistake because you have no idea where the trends will be or whatever, it's so volatile.
Laura, before you go, what is the main message or maybe even takeaway that you hope readers get from How Can I Help You? Other than not be a serial killer?
Yeah, right. Or maybe do. I don't know. Maybe that's the message. No,
Be kind to your library patrons.
Yes, you should be kind to your librarians because you never know.
That's right.
You never know what's going on. I hope that people will
don't be the creepy guy in the court at the computer.
Please don't. Please don't. Because they exist.
I've met that guy.
I
know when you're writing about that guy, I've seen that guy at
he's at every library.
He's at every library. Yeah.
It's true.
It's a caricature.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. I hope that people will just enjoy it as a story, enjoy the story of it and the characters. And, I like people I would like people to see in it kind of a different take on the thriller. Mm-hmm. It is more psychological. I think, like, to me, it's like a character study that happens to have some exciting stuff happen towards the end. Yeah. So I hope that people approach it in a way that allows them to enjoy that part of it, but just enjoy the story and also, see what the library is really like. I did try to capture that for people who might have these kind of romanticized notions of what libraries are, from movies and stuff. Like they're actually really lively, interesting places with many layers to them.
Before I let you go, I always ask this question, and it's, and I'm sure this has already happened, but somebody's going to come up to you with a well-worn copy. It might even be that guy, right? He's going to come in with a well-worn copy of How Can I Help You? And they're going to say, Laura Sims, this is my favorite book of all time, and I want to be a writer. Like, I want to write stories like this. What's the biggest piece of advice you would give me? So what is Laura Sims' number one piece of advice for that aspiring author?
It's cliched, but persistence is really, it goes back to what we were talking about with rejection. Mm-hmm. There's just nothing that replaces persistence and sitting down and actually doing the work and thinking about what my friend said, which is, you focus on what you're doing and what you enjoy, not about, the market or what you think readers will like. Nothing but what gives you pleasure, and go into that, and do the work. I
think Robert Greene, who wrote the 48 Laws of Power, said that the times of his dedication to his craft were more important than the times of extreme inspiration.
I can see that. It's true. You have to do the work.
I've always said if you only write when you feel inspired, you'll never finish.
Oh gosh, especially with fiction. You can kind of do that with poetry. It's one of the pleasures of it is like you get these bursts of inspiration that I learned quickly as a fiction writer. And it's one of the things I like about it actually is because I can sit down and like fiddle with stuff. And, it's just a longer form and more work.
Laura, where can our reader or where can our listeners, our viewers find you?
You can find me on Instagram at Laura Sims 2121. That's probably the easiest place.
Cool. And How Can I Help You is available everywhere.
It's available everywhere.
Hopefully at your public library.
It is. Yes. They would have had a big problem if they didn't. They have 3 copies. So,
Great. Laura, thank you for your time today.
Thank you so much, Andrew.
This was so much fun. And I look forward to what you have next.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
That's our interview for the day. Thank you for tuning in, and remember to subscribe for more insights and wisdom for your writing journey at the Indie Author Method. Find us online at my website, www.andrewjbrandt.com.
All of this convenience just doesn't work for me. I wanna play with fire, let me get hurt.